Good morning, good morning. I think I'm a couple of minutes early, but I just wanted to come in and check internet signal and stuff like that before we get cracking. So, fingers crossed, it's looking okay. We have really intermittent signal here. So, firstly, hello Debbie, lovely to have you on. I'm a few minutes early. Just first of all, just wanted to say a big welcome. We've had quite a few new ladies coming into the group over the last few days. So hello and welcome. You will find your feet over the coming days and weeks. So today we are going to be, throughout the rest of May, what I want to do in the group is to start doing some work exploring our inner and outer child. But before I launch into stuff about inner child, I thought it would be really nice to actually give a bit of sort of theory as to where the work that I do with the inner and outer child comes from. But before I talk about that, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I did a live on Saturday where I talked about safety, your safety. So I just want to reiterate that again in case you haven't seen that live. It's really important that you feel that if something gets stimulated for you as you go through this process, okay, because we are going to be exploring your childhood, so there is a real possibility that some stuff might get emotionally triggered for you, and I just want to reinforce again, if that does happen, please reach out to me so we can work through whatever is going on for you. Okay, that is my permission to you here and now, that if something gets emotionally triggered, if you're feeling particularly upset, if you want to talk through something, reach out to me so we can clear it and we can work through it, so you're not sitting on that. Because if something gets triggered for you and it overwhelms you or it frightens you, the chances are what you're going to do is back away from it and not engage in the rest of the work that we're going to be doing. So hi Deborah, lovely to have you on. So it's really important that if stuff does get triggered for you, that you reach out either to the group or to me, and this is me giving you permission to do that. Just send me a private message and we can just exchange a few texts, or I can jump on a call with you. Hi Stacey, thank you for joining me, because that's really, really important, because a lot of the reason why we don't face some of this stuff is it feels really scary. And so I want you, the first thing is, go at your own pace with this stuff. We've all got our histories, haven't we, in terms of childhood. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But safety is really, really important. So please, if anything gets triggered for you, please reach out and we can talk through it. And if there are a few of you in the group that I'm regularly in contact with, where we just talk things through. So, I'm pretty easygoing. For newbies in the group that don't really know me, asking for help or reaching out can be quite a toughie, but that's my permission. And if anyone has committed to doing the work over the next few weeks, and I'm not seeing much from you, I might send you a quick message just to see if everything's okay. So that's safety, confidentiality. This is a closed group, so only those of you that are in the group can see anything that gets posted. But obviously, a big part of who we are as humans is we feel vulnerable when we start sharing stuff that's personal to us. But being able to share that and being able to step into our vulnerability is hugely powerful and really helps with our healing. So confidentiality is really important. And what I mean by that is what gets shared in this room, in this group, stays in the group. And those of you that have signed up, we've got a private messenger group, and I know a lot of you have committed to that confidentiality. So ladies, any of you that are watching this that are new to the group that haven't, please let me know if you're going to engage in the challenge so I can add you into that messenger group. It's so as I can send you a quick message to say that a new activity's gone in the group. Facebook groups can be a bit of a minefield, and as much as I try to keep some kind of control with posting in terms of the learning section. So any vital or important posts that I'm doing for this focus will go into that learning section. So if you can't find them in the group, you can go to the learning section and you'll be able to find them. So I think that's it on housekeeping. They're the two main things. The safety side, so keep yourself safe, and also the confidentiality, really, really important. So inner child. So a little bit about our inner child. If you're sat there, I'm going to start with inner child this week. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Next week, we'll start moving into outer child, although we will touch on some of that stuff. Anyway, hi Di, lovely to have you on. Hi Jess. Nice to see so many of you on this Monday morning. I will be using some props. Why is it whenever you want to do something, the printer always decides to pack up? So that was my morning this morning. Anyway, inner child. And I know some of you have worked with me on this stuff before, okay, but it's an ongoing process. And we all have an inner child. We all have an inner child and an outer child. And you know, in childhood, we all experienced trauma of some sort. And, you know, when we think about that, we often think about things like abuse, physical, emotional, sexual abuse. But actually, it's not, that's kind of one end of the spectrum. But actually, as children, we all experience levels of trauma, you know, from having our favourite teddy bear chucked away. You know, I remember my mum chucking away my favourite jumper and I was devastated. And it wasn't about the jumper, it was about her lack of understanding and respect for what I liked. And so we have these experiences in childhood, you know, up to the age of 7, what's happening in our little being is we are developing our emotional self, okay, and that's our inner child. And the statistics that are applied to this is that an attuned parent is attuned about 30% of the time. You'll often hear me saying this stuff. So what that means is for 70% of our growing up, all the experiences we had from day one of birth got missed. And as children, what we do, we're very good at giving meaning to things. And so what we do as little children, we experience what we experience and we give meaning to it. I put a post in this morning about physical touch. I don't know if anyone's read that. And, you know, as children, you know, my mum was really busy. She worked full time. She also was a compulsive cleaner. So if she wasn't working, she was cleaning. And I have very, very strong memories of being very, very small, probably 3 or 4 years old, and going up to my mum and trying to get a cuddle from her and her pushing me away, saying she was too busy. And my mum would then give me a tin of biscuits as well. So she would push me away because she'd say to me, go and sit in the living room, put the telly on, and she'd give me this tin of biscuits. And I'd be sat there. Maybe I was a bit older than 3 or 4. Maybe I was 5, maybe 6. So I'd be sat there with my tin of biscuits, feeling quite rejected and feeling really sad and quite lonely because my mum didn't have time. This is my little child brain making sense of what's going on there. You see, as children, we don't have adult logic and we don't have the capability of being able to say, oh, mum's just busy. You know, we see it how we see it. You know, and we feel that rejection. And so I remember sitting there with my tin of biscuits and eating away and feeling, I suppose, satisfied through the food I was eating, but also feeling sad and lonely. And I know that's kind of where my associations with emotional eating certainly started. So inner child work, okay, is about helping you to start connecting with that younger part of self, that part of you aged 0 to about 7, where you formed lots of beliefs about yourself, about other people, and about the world. Because what happens, as we go through life, and when I start to introduce transactional analysis will make a bit more sense for you, as we go through our lives, okay, sometimes we change some of our beliefs about things, but quite often we don't. So many of our beliefs that were formed by the age of 7 stay with us and we carry them into adulthood. And part of those beliefs are the way in which we respond emotionally to things in our lives. And so that's why inner child work is really important to start exploring and understanding, because there are times in the here and now where something happens, And it could be a person, something happens with a person, a situation, you could be watching telly, but all of a sudden we get emotionally triggered. So we go from feeling calm and okay to then not feeling like that. We feel upset, or we feel angry, or we feel frustrated. And what happens at that moment in time is our little inner child, our little emotional self that hasn't evolved from childhood, gets triggered. Does this make sense, guys? And I'm going to talk more about the inner child over this week, but that is what your inner child is. So you can start to see, the more you can start to understand and connect with that younger part of self. I always say to clients, imagine you're like a Russian doll. You know, all those little wooden dolls that go inside each other. That's what make us up as human beings. We have all these different parts of our personality, and your inner child is just a very small part of your overall personality. But what we allow to happen is we allow that little part of ourselves to kind of run the show a little bit emotionally. Either she's stuffing those feelings down, or she's letting them out, often over exaggerated. So what we find, we go through our lives being either overly emotional or underly emotional. Don't know if that's a word, is it underly? So getting a handle on your inner child and taking away the responsibility she currently feels she has to have is beautiful. It's a really beautiful process to go through. And don't get me wrong, we're not trying to get rid of the inner child. She's super important. And what I'm going to do in a minute is talk about the different aspects of self in a little bit more detail. And you'll see how the inner child in her authentic form is a beautiful part of who we are. But quite often we don't allow that part of us out. We keep her hidden, because as children we learned that wasn't okay. It wasn't okay to make a noise. It wasn't okay to make a mess. It wasn't okay to have an opinion. So all of these parts of our personality get squished down and squashed down, and cake is really good at doing that. Does this make sense, guys? Anyway, let's move on. So that's a little bit about your inner child, and that's what we're going to be exploring this week. And yes, there might be elements of it that touch you emotionally, because I am going to be encouraging you to take a little bit of a step back in time, which is why grounding exercises are really powerful. Because if you find you're getting sort of lost in those moments and you're overwhelming yourself and getting upset, being able to kind of pull yourself back and know that this is just you being curious. Bravery and curiosity are so important when it comes to inner child work, because some of what we experienced, it is quite sad, can make us feel quite sad. And when we start to voice this stuff, we can put labels on it and we give meaning to it, and we feel embarrassed and we feel vulnerable, all of that stuff. And bravery and curiosity and allowing, almost holding our own inner child through this process. And when we start doing some more of the connection work, you're going to have some lovely strategies to help you do that. Anyway, today's activity is all about transactional analysis. Now, some of you may have studied transactional analysis. It's something that's used in lots of different fields of development. It's not just about weight and overeating. This is about life stuff generally, and that's why this is so powerful. You'll hear me say time and time again, your weight is not the problem. I know you think it is. If only I could lose that weight, my problem will be gone. For some of you it might be, but in my experience, my weight was just a symptom of everything else that was going on in my life. Okay, and I got to my heaviest, which was 19 stone, because I was in a very dysfunctional relationship for about 7 years. He was physically and emotionally abusive. I went into that relationship a size 14, came out of it a size 24. I didn't get to that weight because I liked food or I was greedy. I got to that point because I was really unhappy. I was scared. I was in a relationship where I felt very unsafe, and food was my thing. But I'd learnt that strategy much earlier in time. And so transactional analysis is a really nice way to help you look at and explore and understand all those different parts of your personality, and where some of those parts of your personality might be leading you to behaviours or thoughts, feelings and behaviours that then lead to overeating. So the overeating is just the thing we do, the coping mechanism. And I have two theories on this. I think we fall into two camps. You know, we all know about emotional eating. So you have somebody who eats, an emotional eater eats to make themselves feel good. It's better. It's as simple as that. But you also have a camp of people who eat to maintain a bigger body. So they have this belief that being bigger protects them in some way. Again, you'll often hear me talking about fat being an armour, and that certainly was the case for me, and I think still is a little bit, and it's something I'm working through to understand more fully about my own relationship with safety. So somebody who maybe, I'll give you an example, you can be both, yes Debbie, somebody who's maybe been abused. I do work with lots of clients who've been sexually abused as children or physically or mentally abused as children. And the little child logic makes the decision that if they make themselves fat, it makes them unattractive to the world, or it's a layer of protection. So they've got their little inner child inside that stays safe by these layers of armour, if that makes sense. And so the overeating actually becomes a tool, if you like, or a vehicle by which they can maintain this bigger body. So when you start to explore and think about, God, why do I find it so hard to lose weight? If your fat is an armour for you, if for some reason your fat is the way in which your inner child is protecting herself from the world, okay, and this may not make sense at the moment, but hopefully as we work more, it might start to make a little bit more sense. So you've got this armour, this fat, this protection layer. Yeah, let's go on a diet. So for your inner child, what does that actually mean? That means losing those layers of protection. So you can see how that's going to be pretty scary for her. So I'm not going to go into any more detail on that at the moment, but just to get your little mind starting to connect to some of this stuff, to start to help strip away any belief that you've got that your weight is the problem, okay? Your weight is not the problem. It's the underlying reasons that are triggering your overeating that is the problem. I don't even like that word really. That's triggering the emotional eating or triggering the need to stay safe. Does that make sense, guys? So yes, Debbie, it can be both. Certainly, I think if you're an emotional eater, you can stand alone and be an emotional eater. I think if you are somebody who that has a shield, your fat is a shield, you can also be an emotional eater as well. So the two go hand in hand. So yes, absolutely. I think you can be both. And it's quite interesting when you start exploring that. Absolutely. You know, we talk about emotional eating. Emotional eating is only one strategy. So I'm just answering Debbie's question. She's asked, can that be with other issues like clutter, etc., as a form of protection? Absolutely. You know, if you know anything about hoarding, it's quite a fascinating subject. But emotional eating is just one go-to thing. And I very much link emotional eating into addictive eating. You know, I don't know about you, there'll be times where I'm stood in front of the fridge and I'm eating something and I can't not eat it, even though my logic brain is saying, what are you doing? You know, it's really powerful stuff. It's addictive. And you have got the sugar side of food as well that stimulates the part of the brain that cocaine does. So that indicates that certain foods that we eat have an addictive nature and addictive quality to them. I don't know about you, if I need some comfort, I don't turn to cod or chicken. It's always high fat, high sugar, high carb, because that's kind of that feeds that part of our brain. So yes, absolutely, there are different coping strategies for sure, and OCD, you know, obsessiveness, cluttering, all of those kinds of things are absolutely. Oh, Stacey's saying she's a clutter bunny. Oh, you and I, we wouldn't be able to live together. Well, I'm kind of, on the surface, everything looks like really orderly, but if you open any of my drawers, it's complete chaos. Yeah, it makes us feel safe, doesn't it? Clutter. For some people who I'm the other way, I don't feel safe if it's, I went through a phase of I didn't have it diagnosed, but when I was losing weight, interestingly, so food was no longer my thing, I became very obsessed with things. It wasn't bacteria or sort of or that sort of OCD, it was tidiness. And I know now if I get a little bit stressed, I go from the house looking okay to it then me seeing fault everywhere. I don't know if anyone can relate to that. So there's definitely a link with me that if I'm stressed or I'm worried about something, all of a sudden I start seeing things not being how I want them to be, and it's a weird one. I'm very conscious of it, and I when I get like that, I take time out. I try not to, like, some days I just go with it and I give a mass kind of tidy up, which is awesome. But a lot of the times I try to, because this is inner child stuff kicking off, and I'd kind of sit down with her. When I'm in tune with my inner child and I know she's trying to tell me something, I kind of just go and sit on the sofa 5 or 10 minutes and just kind of do some deep breathing and just kind of tell her it's okay. Imagine, you've got this little 5 or 6 year old inside you. Why are you treating her any different to you would a 5 or 6 year old that was a real child in front of you? So, and we're going to talk about all of this. So, just catching up. I'm a clutterbug. You've got a load of clutterbugs. I do actually have a 30-day decluttering challenge. I'll have to run that soon in the group then. Anyway, I've digressed. So transactional analysis, that's what I'm going to cover with you a little bit today. Bit of theory, because it's nice to have a bit of theory, isn't it? Bit of understanding where the inner child work actually comes from. I am studying transactional analysis psychotherapy, and I got into it. I basically went on a TA 101. It was a 2-day course, and my God, I was absolutely hooked from day one. It made so much sense to me. It really did. And they were starting the foundation year in a couple of weeks, and I signed up there and then. And I'm now 3 years into that study. I'm currently on a break for a couple of reasons. The main one being I need to decide. It's very time consuming. I know, Debbie, you're studying at the moment. I'm not a natural studier, so I did find the study quite challenging. But also it's quite expensive to do the course by the time you've done all the bits that are associated with it. And I'm at that point where I need to decide, am I going to continue for another 3 years? Because that's what it is. And what am I going to get at the end of it that I can't do now? So I'm just in a bit of a transition period. It's all right. I don't mind. But I'm easily distracted. I don't mind you taking me off track at all. That's great. That's the best thing when we have interactions. I might actually even do that, get a load of you on a Zoom call and just have like a mass debate, mass chat. I love all stuff like that. Anyway, transactional analysis, let's get started. So some of you might be familiar with this. This is my really crude drawing. I don't know if you can see that. It's also known as the PAC model. So if you think about Pac-Man, you'll remember this. So that's the really basic, look, you can see where my printer stuff was starting to run out there. So that's the very basic model. And it works on the basis that within each of us, so remember I said about the Russian doll, Styly, this is what starts to build up those different bits of your personality. So within all of us, we have what's called a parent, an adult, and a child. Okay, so I'm going to put that down for now, just while I talk a little bit about it. So what I want to do is just talk about where these different parts of ourselves come from. So you have a parent ego state. Ego states is what they're called. That's just the proper term, the proper transactional analysis term. Ego states, it just kind of means behaviour type, really. So you have a parent. So just to get you thinking about, when you think about the word parent, what do you think about? And your parent ego state, okay, do you remember when we're born, we're little babies and we don't know anything really. We're kind of born into the world. We can breathe, we can poo, we can't really do a lot else, okay? So everything we experience and we learn is from what goes on around us. Okay, so your parent ego state is made up of all the main people that have influenced you in your life. So if you think about that, from day one of birth, think about who was around you: mum, dad, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, nans, teachers, coaches, I don't know, all these different people, carers, for anyone who wasn't brought up with their parents, their birth parents, they may have been adopted, they may have gone into care. So all of these people, these older role models, if you like, that we had in our lives growing up. So they are what forms your parent ego state. Now, I don't know about you. Do you ever hear yourself saying stuff and you think, oh my God, I sound like my mother? I even look in the mirror now and I think, God, I'm getting to look more like my mum. So that is your parent ego state, okay? So it's kind of the rules of childhood, or your rule-bound part of self, because that is part of growing up, isn't it? You know, if you think about what a parent's role is, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute. You know, a parent's role is to guide, keep you safe, but equally it is about nurturing as well. So we have these two parts of the parent. So that is your parent ego state. Okay, so it's all in your subconscious. Okay, your brain is like a computer and you have a hard drive, and that is your subconscious, and you have got every single experience you've ever had from day one of birth in your subconscious. Even the pre-verbal stuff is in there, which is why sometimes we just can't make sense of anything, because we don't remember it because it's pre-verbal, we were too young. That is just how it is, but it's in there, okay? So your parent ego state is your subconscious, and it's all the experience. It's all these, we kind of take them on board. We take on board their personalities. You know, that's how we learn as kids. We mimic, we observe, and we mimic, and that's how we learn. And so that is your parent, okay? So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So you also have what's called an adult ego state. So adult is the here and now. So when you are responding, you know, so transactional analysis is about transactions. So it's about how we transact with people in our lives, but also how we transact with ourselves. And don't tell me you don't talk to yourself, because you do. I know you do. We all do. So that is what this is all about. It's about how we transact with people in our lives and how we transact with ourselves. So we also have an adult ego state. And your adult is kind of logical and it's rational, and it bases its responses on the here and now. So it's very assertive. It does have emotion but it's appropriate emotion according to what's going on. It's not overly emotional. It's not underly emotional. It's appropriate. So it's the adult is when you are basing all of your responses on what's going on in the here and now. You're not banding back to the past and pulling up everything someone's ever done to upset you. Equally, you're not going into the future and worrying about stuff. It's very here and now. You know, when you start to actually think about adult, you know, how much time do you actually spend in your adult ego state? It's quite scary, really. So that's adult. So we've looked at parent, we've looked at adult, and then we have our lovely child ego state. And that's the bit that we're going to be really focusing on over the next few weeks. So your child ego state is every experience you had as a child. So children are emotional beings up to the age of 7. That is all about their emotional development. And so your child ego state is all your experience, all your emotional experiences as a child. And when we start to break that down into the different parts of your child, it will start to make more sense for you. So everything you ever experienced as child is locked away in your child ego state. And you know, all the good stuff, but also the stuff that isn't so helpful for you. So that's a really high level look at transactional analysis, but it goes a bit further, and I'm only going to take it down to this level, because if we go any further, you'll just be thinking, oh my God, am I like, you never think that, you always sometimes think that you're completely bonkers because you've got all these different parts of self. I know sometimes I've got 3 or 4 conversations going in my head. Is that just me? So this is the next layer. I do apologise, I had to draw this one because my printer wasn't playing ball. So anyway, what that says, so basically you can see that the 3 things split down. So your parent ego state, which is this one, breaks down into critical and controlling parent and nurturing parent. So your critical controlling parent, if you think about the role of a parent, yeah, it is to guide and it is also to nurture. So you've got these 2 parts of the parent. So the critical controlling parent is the guiding one, but it has there are helpful and unhelpful parts to this. And when you start, what I'm going to get you to do today is start thinking about your own experience growing up. I had an incredibly critical mum, to the point now where I say to my mum, she's not as bad as she used to be, but I will say to her now, Mum, if you've got nothing good to say, don't say it, because she's just got that sort of barbed, venomous tongue. She doesn't engage her brain before she thinks. So growing up, I had a very, very critical mum. If I got 70% in a test, it was, why didn't you get 80%? And I kind of get that they wanted me to do better, but it left me with a real sense of lack, of not being good enough. And I'm sure some of you can connect. You know, one of the things I want to just point out here, whilst I remember I wanted to do it in housekeeping, inner child work is about you exploring your inner child, you know, from a here and now perspective, but seeing how it's influencing your thoughts, feelings and behaviours in the here and now. Inner child work is not about bashing our parents. We have to believe that our parents did the best job that they did. That doesn't mean they got it right. Okay, so this process isn't about beating our parents up. You know, when I first started my own counselling, it took me a while before I could talk openly about some of this stuff, because I felt really disloyal to my parents. I felt like I'd created this fantasy a little bit, and it felt wrong actually saying some of the stuff about, you know, my dad did some really shaming things to me, nothing really bad, but as a 6-year-old it had a real impact on how I was in the world. It stopped me being so free and free-spirited, and you know, that wasn't okay. You know, he was just an adult being a bit of a twat with his mates, and you know, I can see that now, but as a child I didn't feel that. So I just want to point that out. Inner child work is not about bashing our parents up, so please don't think that that is what this is about, but it is also about exposing and exploring parts that kind of weren't quite right, and being able to look at that and explore it and maybe choose a different way of seeing things. So the parent ego state, just catching up on, sounds like my dad. Okay, yeah, and do you know what, that stuff stays. You know, those early years experiences are very powerful, and they may not show up in your life every day, but they will be there, and they will be protecting you in some ways, because that's what the inner child does. The inner child, up to the age of 7, you made some decisions that either got you praise or avoided punishment. That's basically it as a child. That is what you are there, and that's what you're trying to do. Get as much praise as you can and recognition, or avoiding punishment. And so we learn strategies for getting either, and I'm going to talk about that later in the week. So parent ego state, is this stuff making sense so far? I'm conscious I'm bombarding you with loads of stuff. So parent ego state, critical controlling, has 2 parts to it. It has the unhelpful. So my mum was an unhelpful critical parent, you know, constantly whatever I did wasn't good enough. Now, when you start to actually think about where do you do that for yourself, you know, I've been hugely critical of myself for so long, and it's something I'm working on, and it's like it's my mum's voice there in my head going, you know, that critical, putting everything down that I do, never praising myself. I've done a lot of work on my internal critical parent over the years, but every now and again it still slips in there, and I have to kind of really remind it and almost tell it to bugger off. I don't want it to go completely, because it does also have this really helpful side to it. So if you think about the role of a parent, it is there to set you rules and to guide you and set boundaries and keep you safe. That's when when the parent ego state is at its strongest. And when you start to think about your weight and your relationship with food, you know, where do you set yourself boundaries, helpful boundaries that actually keep you safe, that encourage you to take care of yourself, you know. So that's the parent ego state in the critical controlling. And I'm going to set you some questions at the end of this, where I'm going to get you thinking about where in your lives can you recognize the critical parent, and where is it the harsh critical parent, or where is it the supportive critical parent. Just catching up on there, some things. Brilliant, good stuff. I'm glad it's making sense. I know I can get a bit carried away. Oh, I just love this stuff. So that's your critical controlling parent. There's loads of stuff on the internet, by the way, about this stuff. So if you want to delve a little bit deeper, just pop in transactional analysis, and you'll get loads of great stuff too. I will catch up on all your messages at the end of the live, by the way. So if I miss any, don't worry, we'll respond to you. So the other side of the parent is the nurturing parent. The part of the parent that role is to show their child how much they're loved, so it's the comforter, it's the showering them with praise and recognition and hugs and kisses and all of that stuff. And equally, like the critical parent, you've got two sides to the nurturing parent. So you have the positive nurturing parent that says all the lovely stuff, the affirmations, the positive strokes, the praise, the recognition, the hugs, the kisses, the buying gifts, all of that lovely stuff. But you also have the unhelpful, comforting parent, and this is where sits your emotional eater, your comfort eater, the part of you that feeds you. Yeah, so my mum was a feeder. That's how she showed us love. She struggled with kisses and cuddles, but she fed us and she got a lot of pleasure from feeding us. So I remember as a kiddie, seeing mum's face when we ate the food and the joy she got from that. So I did it all the more. And I had a really fussy sister, by the way. And so I learned very quickly to eat my food up and I got praised for it. But equally, my sister got told off. So my mum would say to my sister, why can't you be like your sister? So that gave me like a win-win. And this is how this stuff forms. And that's why taking a trip down memory lane and exploring childhood is so important, because it is everything. It is the foundation of what is going on in your life today. So nurturing parent, helpful, unhelpful, where do you nurture yourself in a positive way? Where do you nurture yourself in a way that is not supportive and not helping you to live the life you want to be? So that is your parent ego state in a nutshell. You have the critical, controlling, positive and unhelpful. You have the nurturing parent, positive and unhelpful. So you have those two parts. So start thinking about your parent ego state. Who influenced you growing up? Were they critical? Were they supportive? Did you have someone in your family that fed you? Grandmas are great for that kinds of stuff. I was very fortunate because as much as I didn't get kisses and cuddles from my mum and dad so much, my nan was the complete opposite, thank God. So I had like yin and yang really. I had the experience of a very overly emotional nan, very loving, very cuddly. And so I got that experience from my nan. And so, again, I had that part of my personality because we spent a lot of time with my nan. So that's your parent ego state. Okay, ladies, and we'll move on to child, then we'll go to adult last. So my crude drawing again, look at that. Could you see that? So that is your child ego state. And there are 3 parts of your child ego state. 3 parts. So you have what's called an adaptive child. Okay, I think that kind of says it all really. Any people pleasers in the group? I think we'll have a big show of hands on that one. That is your adaptive child. So I mentioned earlier that as children, we've got 2 aims really. One is to get as much recognition as we can possibly get, and the other one is to avoid punishment. So the adaptive child, it's the part of us that wants to please. And so we learn this stuff in childhood, without a doubt. We want to please our parents and we learn. And it's not even necessarily verbal. My mum only used to have to raise an eyebrow and I'd know she wasn't happy. It's so like that in families, isn't it? It's not even things that get said. We pick up on energy and we pick up on body language, and we know whether we're getting a big tick in the box and everything is good or whether it's not. And so the adaptive part of us, it's interesting because we also have the opposite, which is the rebelling child. So we have these 2 parts, which adaptive and rebelling. And depending on who you are as a child, you're going to go one of 2 ways. Because, if you observe a group of children, you'll see the ones that are doing as they're told, the adaptive ones, and you'll see the ones that aren't and are rebelling and being a bit naughty. And it's really interesting because it's the naughty children that get the attention, isn't it? And the poor little ones that are actually doing as they're told and being good don't get any attention. So, all of this stuff is really fascinating. And I love watching how humans interact and how they interact with children. So your little adaptive child, so the part of you that wants to please, okay, and again, it has a helpful and an unhelpful. You know, I love doing things for people, absolutely love it. It makes me feel good, it makes them feel good. That is my positive adaptive child. It's the part of me that wants to please people because it makes me feel good. It enhances me, and that's a fabulous thing. But I also have the unhelpful part of my people-pleasing adaptive child. So the part of me that says yes to people when really I want to say no. The part of me that goes along with what other people want because I don't want to unsettle, ruffle feathers or anything like that. So it is that part of you. The unhelpful adaptive child is the part of you that's very stuck in the people-pleasing mindset. So it tends to be quite passive when we look at behaviour types. You know, we recently looked at assertiveness and we looked at the over assertive and the under assertive. So people who are in the adaptive child tend to be more passive, which alongside that goes moaning, feeling a bit like a victim, feeling quite misunderstood. So that's the two parts of your adaptive child. So it is all about pleasing other people. And sometimes that's great, but sometimes it's not. And I'm sure for those of you that are people pleasers, you know the impact of being a people pleaser. Okay, we will talk about that a little bit more as we get to know your inner child a little bit more. So you also have the rebelling child. And for those of you that hear me talk about outer child and think, oh my God, not more parts of my personality, that is your outer child. It's the rebelling part of you. Think how many times you rebel when you're trying to lose weight. Especially if someone says, but there is positive rebellion as well. You know, you've got, when someone's trying to make you do something you don't want to do, that part of you that actually goes, I'm not doing it. And you stick to your guns and you stick to what it is you want to do. So if you've someone who's been on a diet and someone's trying to give you some chocolate, you know, if you turn around and say, no, do you know what? I really don't want it. You know, even if that part of you does really want it, if you say no to them, that is your positive rebelling child. You're rebelling against something that somebody wants of you. When you're rebelling in your unhelpful form is when it does you damage. So, for example, if somebody says, oh, should you be eating that? If you're the one eating the chocolate and someone says, oh, I thought you were on a diet. I'm sure we've all got this example. Your unhelpful rebelling child is kind of go, stuff you and then go and eat another one just to prove the point. So that's not hurting anyone. That's not hurting the other person. That hurts you. You know, if you think about how many times in your life you get cross with someone or you do something because you're rebelling against them, even though it might be doing you harm. So that is your rebelling. That's the rebelling part of the child. So the positive is where you rebel when somebody makes the demand of you that you don't want to do and you stick to your guns. The unhelpful rebelling is where someone's maybe trying to help you and you're rebelling against it, even though you know it makes sense. Okay? You do that a lot, do you, Debbie? Well, we know, I can't wait to meet your outer child. We could call her Minnie the Minx, aren't we? We are going to name all the parts of your children, by the way. It just helps with that connection. You know, if you give something a name, you feel more connected to it. I'm not mad, honestly, I promise you. So that's your adaptive child, that's your rebelling child. And the last part, this one, is your free child. Your free child energy. Wow. What do you think your free child might be? And equally, this does have a positive and not so positive. When we think about free, spontaneous, creative, fun, you know, when you look at children, you know, I used to run a lot of groups with ladies focusing on their weight, and I used to hand out bits of paper and pencils, and before I'd even ask them what to do, you could see the look of terror on their faces at the fact I was going to ask them to draw something. And I used to think, God, if I did that to a load of 3-year-olds, I'd get a completely different reaction. You know, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, you give them a piece of paper and pencils and they're like that. Oh my God, they're drawing before you can even tell them what you want to do. What happens to us? What happens between 4 and like just wanting to draw and 24 and thinking, oh my God, no way am I drawing? think about that process. So that's your free child. Your free child is this part of you that is spontaneous, is creative, that has fun, picks their nose, farts without worrying about it. Yeah? However, that's the positive form of your free child. The unhelpful side is, and I can really relate to this, where you allow yourself to be free and spontaneous, but it might involve alcohol or drugs or some kind of stimulant that allows you to feel able to let go. So we kind of think about free child, I'm free child, I'm free spirited when I've had a drink, but actually that's kind of the unhelpful side, because it's an adult decision to drink the alcohol, or do you make sense? It's you're needing an artificial stimulant in order to feel comfortable, to be able to be free. So that is your free child energy, and she's beautiful. She is a beautiful part of you that often stays hidden, or it comes out when you feel safe, whether you might be somebody who enjoys drawing, you might be somebody who plays an instrument, you might be somebody who does pottery or something like that, who just laughs. Every day I sit down with my dogs and they are a massive lesson to me in terms of being free, and I just lay on the floor with them and I play with them and I'm just so lost in that moment, and it's beautiful. And if we could do more of this stuff, more letting go of the rules of the parent, the structure of the adult, and we can enter into this free-spirited, free energy that we all have, life just becomes a little less serious. So that's your child, and that's the part, the free child, the adapted child, the rebelling child. That's the part that we're going to be really delving into over the next few weeks, and it's exciting, isn't it? So the last part is your adult self. That's this part here. It only has one part of self because it's based on here and now logic. There's none of this being triggered into what's happened in the past or going into the future and worrying. Your adult is rational, logical, based on fact. It has emotion because, we have emotion. We react and respond to things with emotion. No emotion is wrong. It's when we don't, or bad. It's when we don't have our appropriate emotions in the moment that they get suppressed and they build up. And that's when they come out over exaggerated. And that's when we start to get into conflict with people, or we feel really ashamed because we've just had a go at somebody, and often it's the wrong person at the wrong time. And so we build up like a pressure cooker all of this emotion, and then it gets released, and then of course that feels really vulnerable and dangerous. So hopefully that makes sense. So your adult self is just kind of here and now. It's very present, it's very mindful, and the process when you start working on this stuff isn't about you being an adult all of the time, because that's pretty boring really. What it's about is you being able to have access to all of these different parts of yourself at the right time. So, if you're going into a meeting at work and you need to talk about something quite serious, it's not great if the inner child is in play, is it? You won't go into a meeting at work and have your free-spirited inner child. That's not appropriate, and that's really obvious. But it is about allowing ourselves to be able to access these parts of ourselves when appropriate. If you're having a bad day and feeling a little bit sad, well, you might want to engage the positive, nurturing parent and sit yourself down and kind of have some nice words to say to yourself. Or you might phone a friend, somebody who is always supportive and encouraging. So it is about, first of all, looking at where these parts of self are being triggered and not supporting you and helping you in the moment, and especially the inner child. That is the part that we're going to explore over the next few weeks. So I think that is it. I think that went on a bit longer than I was planning, but that's okay, isn't it? Thank you guys for watching. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop some questions up related to what we've talked about today. So I want you to start thinking about your own parent ego state, your own adult and your own child. And I'd be curious to know what you can relate to. You know, what can you think about from your parent ego state? Where are you overly critical? Where do you set good boundaries for yourself? Where do you nurture? How do you nurture yourself positively? How do you nurture yourself in the more unhelpful ways, like comfort eating and stuff like that? And can you make connections back to people in your life that have influenced some of that stuff? You know, I really can connect back to my mum, my nan. The women in my life were very, very powerful role models and influenced quite a lot in that area for me. But equally, your inner your child ego state. Where do you notice you're the people pleaser? Where are you adapting? Where are you rebelling? And when do you have the free child? Are you somebody who can relate to the free child part that uses alcohol as a bit of a mask to feel safe in certain situations? Hope that's been useful. So I will pop the questions in now, and then tomorrow we're going to be hitting the inner child work, and tomorrow is a creative day. So for any of you that don't like the thought of drawing, this is going to challenge you, but that's good. Have a great day, guys. Much love.